Kicked out my husband and his manipulative female best friend after he moved her into our house and tried to share a room with her. My name is Haley, and I'm 29 years old. I used to believe I had married the best man in the world. He was my closest friend, my most trusted companion, and the gentlest man I had ever known. I held on to that belief until the day I saw him packing his clothes and leaving our bedroom, not to go on a business trip, not to visit family, but to move into the room where his best friend was staying, right inside our home. It sounds crazy, I know. If I were someone else hearing this, I'd probably shake my head and say, that doesn't make any sense. But it happened, and I was the one who had to witness it. If you're listening to this story, I just hope you realize you're not alone. You're not being overly sensitive. You're not selfish. And you're definitely not crazy. You have every right to draw boundaries to protect your heart. I met Ethan when I was 24, right after I had moved to the city for work. He was in tech. Smart, funny, a good listener, and he had the kindest eyes. From our very first date, I felt safe with him. But alongside Ethan, there was always another name, Callie. She had been his best friend since childhood. They grew up next door to each other, went to the same schools from kindergarten through college. They texted all day, called each other brother and sister, and had endless stories to share. I felt uneasy, a little hesitant. But Ethan reassured me with the sentence I'll never forget. Callie is part of my childhood, but you're the one I'd choose for my future. I believed him. I really wanted to. He had never done anything to make me doubt him, and I thought, everyone has close friends. Platonic friendship is real, as long as both people respect the boundaries. At least, that's what I believed. But I was wrong. From the very first time I met Callie, I sensed something was off. She didn't greet me with a smile. Instead, she looked me up and down and said half-jokingly, "Oh, so you're Ethan's new girlfriend? A blonde this time, huh?" She laughed. Ethan laughed with her. I forced a smile. But deep inside, something stung. I told myself it was just a joke. Maybe she needed more time to warm up to me. But the jokes never stopped. And they didn't get any kinder. When Ethan and I got married, I thought things would finally change. I thought he would put his wife above his best friend. That he'd understand marriage comes with boundaries. I hoped Callie would understand that too and take a step back. But she never left. She was always there, like a shadow that refused to disappear. She came over whenever she wanted, called my husband at midnight, even brought snacks and stretched out on our couch like it was her own home. I talked to Ethan, not once, but many times. But each time he would just smile and say, "Callie's my best friend. You know that. I've never hidden anything from you. You're my wife. You're the one I love most. Don't let little things like this get to you." I started doubting my own feelings. Was I being too sensitive? Was I just being irrationally jealous of a female friend? I didn't want to be the insecure, overreacting wife. So I stayed quiet. Until one day, Callie showed up at our door with swollen eyes and a hollow face. She said her husband had left her because she couldn't have children. Her mother-in-law had called her useless, and now she had nowhere to go. Ethan wrapped her in his arms like she had just survived a disaster. I stood there, not knowing what to do. As a woman, I understood her pain. And when Ethan asked, "Can Callie stay with us for a while? Just until she feels better?" I nodded, because I didn't want to be heartless, but that was the first mistake. Within just a few days, Callie went from being a temporary guest to someone who controlled the entire atmosphere of my home. She criticized my cooking, rearranged our furniture, adjusted my work desk, and even decided what we watched on TV. I felt like I was living in a space where my voice no longer mattered. Ethan just smiled and said, "She's going through a tough time, babe. Try to be more understanding." I kept quiet. I didn't say anything. I kept telling myself that this would all pass soon. Until the day I came home from work. and found Ethan folding his clothes, packing them from our bedroom. I froze when he looked at me and said, "Callie's been having panic attacks the past few nights. She can't sleep alone. I'm going to stay with her for a while until she gets better." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked him again, hoping he would laugh and say it was a joke. But he didn't. He was serious. And then he added, "There's nothing going on between us. You don't have to worry. I'm just doing the right thing." I let out a laugh, but not from amusement. It was bitterness. Nothing going on? Since when is it considered the right thing for a husband to sleep in the same room with another woman, even if she's a so-called best friend? And what about the wife who's being pushed out of her own bedroom? I had had enough. I looked at both of them and spoke in the calmest voice I had ever used. "If you two care so much about taking care of each other, then you're better off doing it somewhere else. This house is in my name. I no longer have space in my life for people who don't respect me." Ethan stood frozen for a few seconds after I said that. Callie looked up, wide-eyed. They didn't think I would go that far. But that didn't matter anymore. Ethan gave an awkward chuckle, like it was all some sort of silly misunderstanding. "You're overreacting, babe. She's just staying here for a bit. And sharing a room, it's not a big deal. I didn't do anything wrong." I looked at him, long and hard. I couldn't recognize the man standing in front of me anymore. The same man who once promised to protect me from all pain was now the one bringing it straight into our home and telling me I was overreacting. I said nothing. I simply walked to the cabinet, opened a drawer, and pulled out a folder. When I returned, Ethan was still standing there, looking more and more uneasy. I held up the folder. "These are the house papers. The property is in my name. It was a gift from my father when I got my first job. I've been silent for far too long, but not because I'm stupid." Callie flinched. She looked at Ethan as if begging him to say something that would save the situation. But Ethan just stood there, staring at me, at a loss for words. I continued. "I've had enough. Enough of her passive-aggressive comments. Enough of you defending her instead of protecting me. Enough of pretending I'm okay just so I won't seem jealous or petty." My voice started to shake, but I didn't let myself stop. I tolerated it because I loved you. Because I wanted to believe that men and women could be friends without crossing the line. But today, when you left our bedroom to sleep with another woman, even if it's just for comfort, that line was completely erased. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. "I don't need your explanations. You both need to leave. Tonight." They stood there in stunned silence. Callie started crying, like she was the victim. Ethan instinctively wrapped his arms around her. And in that moment, it hit me. I had never been the first choice in his heart. I went upstairs and shut the bedroom door. Inside me was a storm I couldn't name. Anger, hurt, loneliness. But most of all, a deep sense of failure. What did I do wrong? Could I have done anything differently? Was I too rigid? Was I not forgiving enough? I lay on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, completely still. An hour later, I heard the front door slam shut. Then silence. Ethan and Callie were gone. I didn't know where they went. And to be honest, I didn't want to know. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from friends, from Ethan's relatives, even people I once thought were neutral. And the content? Strangely identical. "You're overreacting. It's not that serious. Your husband was just trying to help a friend. Callie's going through a hard time. You should be more compassionate. You're his wife. You should be understanding and supportive." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It felt like Ethan had told them a different version of the story, one where I was the cold, heartless, and selfish wife. No one asked how I felt. No one asked how long I had endured. No one cared how far past my breaking point I had already gone. I was exhausted. So I replied with just one sentence. Thank you for showing me who I need to cut out of my life first. And then I blocked them. All of them. 3 days later, I received a text from an unknown number. It's me. I'm sorry. I still want to come back if you're willing to forgive me. It was Ethan. He said he had always seen Callie as a sister, that there was never anything romantic, that everything he did was only because he wanted to help her through her crisis, and that I had misunderstood the situation. He said if I was willing to talk, we could apologize to each other. We could fix things. Start over. I read that message over and over again. My heart felt heavy. Part of me wanted to believe him, because I had loved him so deeply. Because I had once dreamed of a home with him, kids and laughter. But another part of me, the part that had been drained and bruised, whispered, what if he never changes? What if you go back? And once again, you become the third person in your own marriage. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid. Afraid that I would give in. Afraid I would return to a place I already knew was unsafe. Afraid that I would accept being a wife with conditions. Conditions that meant I had to share my husband with someone else. I tried to focus on work, on myself, on the little things, but a part of me still couldn't let go completely. I still loved him. And that was the most painful part of all. A week later, Ethan showed up at my house unexpectedly. He didn't call ahead. When I opened the door, he was standing there, holding a couple of bags, eyes tired and heavy. I didn't say a word. I didn't invite him in either. But he looked at me and asked, "Just give me a few minutes. If you still want me to leave afterward, I will." I stayed silent, but stepped aside to let him in. The air between us was heavier than ever. He sat down on the couch, looked at me for a long moment, and then finally spoke. His voice was low, weary, and slightly trembling. "I've been thinking a lot. I know I messed up. Not just because of the bedroom situation, but everything that came before it. I didn't realize how much you were hurting. I kept thinking Callie needed me more, because she was more fragile. But I forgot one thing. You are my wife. You should have been the one I protected first." I remained silent. He continued, "I'm not living with Callie anymore. After you kicked us out, we stayed at my parents' house for a while. But things, they weren't what I thought they'd be. I started to see what you had been saying all along. How she always inserted herself between us. How she manipulated every situation to make herself the center of it all. You were right." I looked at him, not with anger, but with the eyes of someone who had been drained by years of emotional battles. He bowed his head, spoke in a small voice. "I'm sorry." For the first time in a long while, I felt tears fall. Not because I was weak, but because finally those words had been said. Even if it was too late. Even if nothing could be fixed. I whispered, "I used to think love was enough. But love can't save a relationship if only one person is fighting for it. I tried. I believed. But I've been hurt too deeply." He nodded. "I understand. I'm not here to ask you to take me back. I just wanted you to know, for the first time in my life, the thought of losing you scared me more than anything else. Even more than losing Callie." I nodded too, quietly. A few days later, I filed for divorce. Not because I hated him. Not because I wanted revenge. But because I knew I had to let go. And I deserved a life where I was the only choice. Not the last resort. I thought that was the end of it. But life has its way of testing us one last time. A few weeks later, I saw Ethan again at the courthouse. It was our first meeting to begin the divorce paperwork. He was sitting there, staring into the distance. When he saw me, he stood up and gave a small nod. The session was quiet. My lawyer spoke. His lawyer did too. Everything was in order. No disputes, no objections. But when we stood up to leave, Ethan followed me outside. He called out softly, "Haley, wait." I turned around. His eyes were filled with tears. "I know this. Doesn't concern you anymore, but I thought you should know. Callie moved out. That day, He paused, struggling to speak. I narrowed my eyes slightly. "That day, what happened?" Ethan swallowed hard, then said, "That day, I was sitting alone in the room. Callie walked in. She started touching my hand, and then tried to hug me. I pushed her away, told her it wasn't appropriate. But then she said, I had led her on for too long, only to abandon her. I stood there frozen." He continued, "I realized then, you were right. She never saw me as a brother. She always wanted more than that, and I was too blind to see it." I stood in silence, not out of shock, but because that familiar ache in my chest returned once again. All those years I had sensed it, but I second-guessed myself. I believed I was being paranoid. I convinced myself it was just jealousy. And now, I finally had the confirmation, but at a cost too high. I didn't say anything else, just nodded slightly, then walked away. After the last time I saw Ethan at the courthouse, I went home and didn't play music like I usually did. I didn't make tea. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't do anything to soothe myself. I just sat on the couch, in the dark, and let all the thoughts quietly pour in. I didn't cry anymore. I wasn't angry anymore. I no longer hoped for anything. It was a strange feeling. Like a part of me had died, and the part that remained was learning how to live again. With a heart that had been crushed, but still had enough strength left to keep beating, and begin again. I started writing, not to post it anywhere. Just to write. About everything I had been through. About the days I doubted my own feelings. About the times I forced a smile in response to Callie's snide remarks. About the moment I watched my husband move his belongings out of our shared bedroom without asking, without thinking he had done anything wrong. I wrote it all down. And when I put the pen down, I felt a little lighter. A few weeks later, I decided to rearrange the house. I changed the curtains, bought a new set of sheets, moved my desk closer to the window so it could catch the morning light. I threw out the things that reminded me of them, of both of them. I didn't do any of it through tears. I did it in silence, with a soft smile, as if I was cleaning up after a storm that had finally passed. I was no longer the woman I used to be, the one who suffered in silence, the one who let others decide whether her pain was valid. I was now me, whole, complete, no longer needing anyone to define me. One day, I went to a nearby coffee shop to read. While I waited for my drink, a girl sitting at the next table suddenly spoke up. "You're Haley, right?" I was surprised. Yes. And you are?" She smiled. "I read the story you posted on the forum. I went through something similar. I once loved someone whose best friend thought she had the right to be involved in everything. I just wanted to thank you. Because of you, I realized I'm not crazy, not weak, and I do have the right to walk away." I didn't say anything in time. I just smiled and gently squeezed her hand. For the first time during this entire painful journey, I realized I had survived not just for myself. Divorce is not the end. It's a different kind of beginning. I don't know what's coming next. I don't have a roadmap for the future. But I know this. I will never again accept a kind of love that forces me to survive on the sidelines. I'll love again, if and when my heart is ready. But next time, I'll choose someone who understands that when they step into my life, there's no room for a third person, even if that person is a childhood best friend. One morning, I woke up after a deep, uninterrupted sleep, something I hadn't had in months. No more knocks at midnight. No more inner debates between, am I too sensitive? And, or maybe he's right. No more walking on eggshells in my own home. I brewed a cup of coffee, opened the window, let the morning sunlight flood the room, and I felt peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had made the choice to let go of what made me bleed. I chose to stop holding on to someone who had already turned his back. I chose to believe in my feelings instead of forcing myself to understand someone else while I was quietly falling apart. Almost 6 months later, I officially received the divorce papers. I stared at them for a while. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just felt grateful. Grateful that life had taught me a painful but valuable lesson. Grateful that I had chosen myself. Grateful that I had the courage to close an old door, even if the wind still howled on the other side. Someone once told me, a strong woman is not someone who never falls, but someone who rises again after she does, and doesn't shy away from admitting she once felt weak. I think that woman is me. I don't know where Ethan is now, and I don't care to know. I don't hate him. I just don't need to think about him anymore. Maybe one day he'll truly understand, or maybe he never will. But that's not my concern anymore. What matters is that Haley, walked away from a marriage filled with conflict. And I'm still here. Still breathing, still living, still smiling, and stronger than I've ever been. If you've made it this far, maybe you've been through something like I have. Maybe you've been overlooked in your own relationship. Maybe you've been told you're too sensitive, too jealous, too selfish, simply because you didn't accept a love with unclear boundaries. Let me say this to you. You're not too anything. You're just feeling what's real, and you deserve a love that's whole. Thank you for listening to my story. This is her side of the story. A place where we tell the stories that are often ignored, forgotten, or silenced. If you've ever been a victim of silence, of invisibility, of quiet suffering, please know this. You're not alone. We're here to listen, to speak, and to remind you that your voice matters.